very good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 194th episode of the Together for Education webinars brought to you by Notebook. 2.5 years back, when the pandemic raged outside our windows and schools had closed down, we here at Notebook felt it was our responsibility to set up a platform for educators to connect meaningfully on discussing problems they were facing with the rising need of digital education and online learning and arrive at common solutions. Today, 194 episodes later, this platform has grown much bigger than we could have ever anticipated, all thanks to your love and support. We have discussed extremely curricular topics here, like digital learning, NEP and assessment, extracurricular topics like sports and theatre, topics like school finance and management, and even evolved topics like mental health. Today, we have a unique topic: are residential schools a thing of the past? Residential schools have been an integral part of our education system since the ancient ages. They have always been identified as a cohesion of discipline, regimentation, holistic education, has all the wonderful values and beliefs those are required to bring up a child. But with the passage of time and the mushrooming of numerous non-residential fancy schools, is that residential schools a thing of the past today? Let's hear from the experts. Our first speaker on this topic is Ms. Monisha Dutta, Director, Doon Girls School, Dehradun. Ma'am started her career as a software developer and corporate trainer after her master's in computer science and later did an MBA in advertising. She has been the co-founder of the Doon Girls School and Dehradun Boys School, which are both residential schools, and currently heading the school as a director, planning, operations and training, and life skills coach. She's also the country head at Learning Forward Indian Foundation and is regularly conducting workshops for teachers. She's actively involved in designing child-centric curriculum and pedagogies, along with training the teachers to meet the demand for tomorrow. Her current ideas of work involve understanding the global education system and devising curriculum and pedagogies for early childhood education and young adults. She is a trained vocalist, painter, a novice equestrian, a passionate wildlife enthusiast, nature lover, avid reader, and checker. You learn till you die is her philosophy and driving force. Ma'am, a very good evening. We have this wonderful topic today. Ma'am, okay. So, ma'am, we have this wonderful topic today. Some studies show that number of residential schools are currently stagnating. Will it ever lose its? We wanted to hear from you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Ganguri, and your entire team for getting me on board with this topic. Frankly speaking, when I say I believe in this philosophy that we are lifelong learners, and I wish I had had my education in my growing years in a residential school, because all said and done, residential schools are not there to go. They are very much here to stay. The basic idea of a residential school is providing an environment which allows you to blossom under a roof. It's more like a Gurukul system. And if we look at our older times, the ones who actually wanted to master in any art or do anything which was different, they all had to get into this system where they were living away from their homes to get trained, to get benefited from that kind of environment. And the basic idea of a residential school is it's not just talking about an academic growth. In today's date and time, if you want to succeed in life, the only way you can succeed in life is if you are I won't say master of many trades, but at least if you're aware of multiple things and you can multitask and you can do, you can be it's almost an expert at a lot of things. You are a diversified person. Your interests are vast. Because there's so much of stress that's going on that academically, if you're doing fantabulously well, you're up there in the graph, but mentally you're not strong. If you mentally are, when we meet these, when we had these children back from their home environments completely in the homes for the last 2 years, one thing that we realized was that home contributes in a lot of things, but not always to the benefit of the individual. Because sometimes, and most of the times rather, children are different. They are the offsprings of the parents, but by the end, they all have an individual identity and they like to explore the areas that their parents might not have had an opportunity, and that is why they did not do it or do not have a flair for it. And they have their own. And when we talk of a human being, a combination of genes, it's not the immediate family. The genes get mutated and transferred over generations. So a residential school gives you a kind of an exposure where you are learning much beyond those books. You're learning to live with each other. Where is that opportunity in a nuclear family where they're just a set of parents and just maybe a sibling, may not be a sibling, an individual child? How is that child going to learn to survive in an environment where he or she needs to coexist with someone? Learning how to lose. Today's date, a lot of parents believe in the philosophy of we cannot say no, or we should not say no. And at times that's not beneficial, because the world outside is not going to give you an opportunity to say yes for everything all the time. I may want it, but I will not get it. So learning how to handle the various coefficients, whether it's adversity, whether it's emotional, all that kind of training only happens in a boarding school. In a day school, it is limited. And by the end of the day, when we are in that environment, we know we will go back home to a certain comfort zone. And we have the opportunity to escape out of that discomfort that we are at the minute. But a residential school will ensure that you are in that environment. You learn to handle the conflict. You learn to live with that conflict, handle that adversity, and get out of that space, resolving it, not running away from it. So in a way, residential schools, the format may change, the trend may change, the content may change, but residential schools are there to stay. Another important point that I would like to point out is when we have a day school, the possibilities of the kind of teachers we can appoint to be able to help in grooming the children will always be limited to the ones that are already available in the city. Whereas in case of a residential school, you have people from all walks of life and different cultures. And somewhere you can get them the best of the pedagogical output. They are exposed to things that they would not have got if you were just having a limitation of picking them up from a set environment. So I think the kind of grooming that a residential school is still doing will continue. It's not going to be something that is going to die out that easily. So I hope I kind of answer your thought.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you so much for those wonderful deliberations. Well, ladies and gentlemen, to discuss this topic, our next speaker is Mr. Achin Bhattacharyya. Achin is a founder and CEO at Notebook, a chartered accountant by training. Achin was a director at Deloitte prior to starting Notebook. He has worked in India and abroad in various senior capacities in GE, PwC, KPMG, and Deloitte. Achin is a member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of England and Wales, a fellow of the ITAI, a member of CPA Australia and CPA Ireland, and a member of CIMA UK. He is also the recipient of the prestigious Indian Achievers Award, an avid reader and a passionate traveler. Achin has keen interest in economics, history, literature, and philosophy. He is a regular speaker at various forums and chambers of commerce, and also contributes articles to various publications regularly. He is also on the board of some of the most renowned corporates and contributes significantly to their brand strategies. Achin, a very good evening, and over to you.
Good evening, everyone. Gauri, am I audible?
Absolutely.
I once again welcome all of you to today's session. Now, personally, I have spent a large part of my student life in residential institutions, and some of my best memories and lifelong friendships have shaped up within those campus walls. Hence, I know the experience firsthand and can vouch for its usefulness in many ways. However, today, to discuss the topic from various perspectives, we are very accomplished and experienced panel of senior educators who have managed residential institutions, led from the front, set up systems, and implemented them. And I would leave this particular part of deliberation around the topic to their trusted hands, and instead tell you a real life story, one that narrates one of the darkest chapters of civilized world, and of course connected to this topic. Of course, not directly, but whenever this term residential school comes in, unfortunately, and I'm going to discuss about 150 years of residential schools in Canada, 150,000 Aboriginal children, and what happened to them. Of course, needless to mention, this in no way advocates the pros and cons of residential schools. That's a completely separate topic altogether. But I wanted to discuss this, and I think more as a tribute, as a mark of respect to all those communities, all those children who suffered. Imagine that you are a 5-year-old. A stranger comes to your village and seizes you from your mother's arm. Imagine he or she takes you hundreds of miles away to a place where strangers in black robes cut off your curly hair and take away those clothes which a child's mother made for him or her. And after taking away the name, the child is assigned a number, separated from siblings, from friends, and even forbidden to speak to each other in their native language, being silenced with shouts, and being punished for breaking rules they don't even know or understand. Being told continually that family traditions and cultures which have been taught to them are evil and barbaric. And the worst part of it, some of them not being able to suffer the torture, even dying. And authorities trying to cover up things. And not only that, children who tried to run away, tried to come back to their loved ones at home, being hunted, being caught, and returned with harsher punishments. Now, imagine the helplessness of parents when they see their children being stolen away from them, being forcibly taken away from them to a cruel place. They could do nothing. If they don't obey the laws, a jail sentence awaited them. And if they resisted, and they knew because they had suffered firsthand the same treatment themselves. Now, this is really unthinkable, barbaric, right? Unless until like very recently, there's a particular commission which was formed, Truth and Reconciliation Commission, who brought out the facts. And the anguish of more than 150,000 Aboriginal children taken away from their parents, sometimes forever. Now, and this happened for more than a century and a half, for a very long period of time. And I'm not talking of distant past, I'm not talking of things that happened 500 years back. The last school closed as recent as 1996 in Saskatchewan province of Canada. Aboriginal children across Canada were stolen away from their homes and healthy communities and forced into residential schools under a government policy to assimilate indigenous people. In one of the provinces, in British Columbia, for instance, there are around 22 residential schools mandated by the federal government. And it was mandatory by law. Parents didn't have the option to refuse. If ever they didn't comply, they are threatened with fines or with imprisonment. And nonetheless, this Aboriginal communities, they still kept on trying to protest, trying to resist these laws because these laws ripped their families apart. And it's so touchy when we read about this that parents often hid their children in deep forests, trying to hide them to avoid capture, send them to faraway friends or relatives in distant communities, and continuously lobbied for schools in their own communities. Now, that particular point of time, the aim was of this particular policy to break the bond between Aboriginal children and their families, communities, and culture. The children were forbidden to speak their native languages, were taught that their culture were inferior. And they suffered all manners of abuse, physical, emotional, psychological, spiritual. And despite these atrocities, children in residential schools and their families at home continued to maintain their connections to each other. Culture is so strong, bonds are so strong. Culture of some of these communities, Aboriginal communities, which dates back thousands of years, it's so deep rooted that they were still able to manage, maintain, and carry on their traditions. All the generations who endured such trauma were silenced for decades because of fear, shame, fear of cruel treatment, constant deprivation. And for many children and grandchildren of survivors, it continues to haunt them. It wasn't until 1984 that most of the schools were closed down. And as I told you, the last one was closed as recent as 1996 in Saskatchewan province of Canada. And this history didn't come much for debate, for discussion in public life for decades. But finally, this is now coming to public platforms. Like in internet, you'll find various articles around this. A lot of research papers have come around this. And current policy of public education has been designed to ensure that such atrocities are never repeated in that country. Teachers are determined to work to ensure that they bring those knowledge into classroom and help prevent such kind of massive violations of children's rights. And in fact, I was reading about something very, very, very interesting, very touching. There's a particular day, September 30th, which is known as Orange Shirt Day, which is celebrated in Canada every year since last 10 years, roughly, where thousands of people gather across the country to remember these victims and survivors of these schools. This annual event is held so that younger generation gets a chance to have a meaningful discussion about the effect of these schools and the dark legacy that these schools have left behind. And why is it called Orange Shirt Day? Again, very interesting. It started at a commemoration ceremony when a small girl, Phyllis, a residential school survivor, shared her story of being sent to a residential school at the age of 6. She and her grandmother bought a new orange shirt to wear to her first day of school. On her first day, that new orange shirt was taken away from her, and she would never see the shirt again. And in her own words, that she told a public gathering, thousands of survivors, that it brought in her a feeling of worthlessness and insignificance. Trying to assimilate to a degree, that personal identities were completely lost. However, today as we speak with this tagline across the globe, that every child matters, this particular day of remembrance and this dark chapter in the history, which teachers across the world, communities across the world taking pledge never to be repeated, I think is worth remembering. Of course, not to say that keeping this aside, I personally believe that residential schools serve a huge purpose of leaving academics, extracurriculars, everything aside. The sense of discipline, the kind of friendships, the kind of bonds that can develop within those walls is, I think, very, very precious, priceless. So these are my thoughts that I wanted to share with all of you. Wanted to just share this small incident with all of you. I thank all of you for giving me a patient hearing. You have a wonderful panel here today of senior educators who have led from the front, managed residential institutions. And I look forward to hear from them, their own experience and their take on this very important topic. Over to you, Gauri.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Achin, for that thought-provoking deliberations, I must say. And well, ladies and gentlemen, to discuss this topic, we do have a wonderful panel lined up for you today. But before we start with the panel discussion, a little bit about us here at Notebook. We at Notebook are an EdTech platform that creates short videos pertaining to the school curriculum. This means that every topic from every subject of the school syllabus has been converted into a series of short videos that can be used in two different situations. One is when you as a teacher are starting out a topic in your classroom, you can play one of these videos as a method of visually introducing the topic to your students. These videos are just 6 to 10 minutes in duration and take up very little of your class time while offering the right kind of material to students to generate curiosity and excitement. The second is when the student is studying at home months later. They have access to the same videos on their personal devices, be it a laptop or a smartphone. They can watch the videos over and over again until they get a very clear understanding of the topic that you had taught. What I'm going to do now is play you some short snippets of notebook videos so that you know what they exactly look like.
Hello students, welcome to Notebook. Remember the last time you had to convince your parents of something? How did you go about it? This is how Neha faced the situation. Neha's examinations were about to start in a week when the film Black Panther released. She knew that her parents would never allow her to waste her Friday evening at the theatre when she had sums to practice and more mock question papers to solve.
When he reached the school, he first saw a girl of 12. Her eyes were bandaged. She was being guided by a boy a few years younger than him. When she was near the narrator, she asked the boy who it was. The boy described the narrator to the girl, and they moved on.
Jean-Baptiste Pierre-Antoine de Monet, Chevalier de Lamarck, often simply known as Lamarck, was a French naturalist. He proposed a very interesting theory on how animals adapted to their environment. He believed that giraffes did not have long necks from the beginning. Ancestors of giraffes might have adapted to a shortage of food from short trees by stretching their necks to reach higher branches.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, those were some short snippets from notebook videos as you just now saw. We have today connected with over 3,500 schools and have had more than 44 lakh students benefit from our videos. If you head over to our website, www.notebook.school, or use our mobile apps for Android and iOS, you can find more than 10,000 such videos at your disposal. With that, it is now time to introduce a wonderful panelist that we have with us today. We have with us today Dr. Monna Khanna, Principal, Vandaya International School, Guwahati. Ma'am is a proficient academician who has more than 20 years of rich experience in education. She is presently heading Vandaya International School, Guwahati, which is a residential school, as its founder principal. Prior to that, as a vice principal of Unison World School, she was actively involved in enhancing career opportunities for her students and successfully revamping education to meet COVID-19 challenges. Dr. Khanna has also headed the maths department at the Doon school and has served as a teacher for 12 years at the illustrious institution. She was awarded the Fulbright Fellowship for the Teaching Excellence and Achievement Program. Her background in education is enriched with notable research works as well. She earned her doctorate in the field of space dynamics and was a member of CFRST, Center for Fundamental Research in Space Dynamics and Celestial Mechanics. She ensured that the professional learning community is characterized by a shared mission, vision, and values, collaboration, resource orientation, and continuous improvement. Ma'am, a very good evening and welcome to the panel. Next, we have with us Ms. Sunayana Nagpal, Principal, Alpha International Academy, Jaipur, Rajasthan. Ma'am holds a BA in English, Mathematics, and Philosophy, MA in English, and a BA. She is currently pursuing her MBA. Prior to her current role, she has also worked with schools like Moria School as Academic Coordinator, HOD English, Cambridge Court High School as Senior Coordinator, HOD English, Kapil Gyanpith as Vice Principal and Officiating Principal. Ma'am has conducted various workshops on CCE for teachers, students, as well as for parents. Workshops for teachers for soft skills and spoken English. She has been the Center Superintendent, Deputy Superintendent for various examinations like AICPMT, AIEEE, AISSC, AISSCE, IIT, Manipal University, CTET, etc., and authored a few books in association with MBT and Ravi Publications. Ma'am, a very good evening and welcome to the panel. We also have with us Mr. Philip Burret, sir, for the panel discussion today. Mr. Burret, who is a senior advisor to Notebook, retired as a deputy headmaster from the illustrious Doon school in Dehradun after 44 years of serving in education across various institutions. Mr. Burret served the Doon school as housemaster, head of department, field of activities, field of student welfare, deputy headmaster, second master, and an acting headmaster with great distinction. He also carried out a visioning exercise for the Doon school in the year 2011 through an in-depth study of a number of British public schools and various schools in the US. Mr. Burret qualified as a leadership trainer at the Wellington College, UK in the year 2000. He is also an athlete, an adventurer, and a naturalist, and truly the SME for our discussion today. Sir, a very good evening and welcome to the panel today. I would request all the panelists to kindly switch on their cameras. If Monna Khanna ma'am can kindly switch on your camera, please, ma'am. Good evening to all of you. Sir, if I can start with Burret, sir, first, please, sir. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Gogori. Hope you can hear me.
Yes, absolutely, sir. You're
Yes.
visible and audible, perfectly correct.
Thank you.
Sir, so my question to you, I'll start the panel with you today, sir. The day schools are mushrooming these days, and not only in metros and big cities, but tier 2, tier 3 towns as well. So, sir, how do you see the future of residential schools standing here? So, being a part of a residential school for an entire lifetime, which I might call.
Yeah. So, I mean, my humble belief is that while these schools do occupy a sort of niche market, and they will not go because there are parents and students who not only want the school, but who are ideally suited to this type of education. But if you look closer, you'll find that admission numbers are dropping in many of these schools. And because these schools are unable to, let's say, keep up with the times, to match the, the modern developments in education, because they rest a lot on their traditions and their past reputation. While at the same time, schools in big metros who are funded by big industrialists are coming up with state-of-the-art schools, day boarding schools where the kids go home at 4:30 in the evening, having done almost everything a boarding school kid does except sleep in the house. I think that the gap between residential schools and day schools are closing. And today, I think the type of parent is somebody who, if he cannot afford a residential school, he believes that his kid can get a reasonably good education and live close to him. We are not living in times where, in 1947, where India first got independence, where there was a dearth of good day schools, and you send them up to the hills for 9 months to be in these lovely hilly environments. That's gone, where the parents were transferable. They were government officers or military officers or political, people. That was the time you needed to send your kid away to get a stable boarding school education. But today that doesn't happen. There is no need for it. And but listening to Monisha Dutta, there is going to be always a niche market for schools. And if I listen to Achin, who speaks beautifully, I also feel that boarding schools have their own issues and problems. And I don't think that the most suitable people are getting into boarding schools. This is my opening words on your question. Over to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. So we have with us Dr. Monna Khanna ma'am today. I think both of you were colleagues for a very long time.
Good evening,
Ma'am,
Gagori, and
Good evening.
Yes, Monna. Good evening, Monna. Nice to see
good
you here.
evening, Philip. Yeah, hi.
Ma'am, my question would be like, you have been a part of a residential school for a very long time. Now, again, you're a part of a residential school. I think the span has been around 20 years now, if I am not wrong.
Yes.
So, ma'am, how have you seen the curve? Is it even not for, even if I don't call it good by statistics also, like the general idea of residential schools getting popular or not getting popular with time, ma'am?
See, I'll recall a small incident and I'll start from there. There was a time a couple of years ago when one of our community members, that was a boarding school community member, had some medical emergency at home and needed some funds, a considerable amount, I would say. And the minute the news was floated, in less than a span of 24 hours, more than double the amount was collected. And if you have places which spread this kind of collaboration, compassion, and empathy, I don't think these places are there to go. They are here to stay. They are not a thing of the past or the future. They are the thing of the present as well. Only, if I have huge regards for Philip, and he has been a great mentor. We've learned a lot from him. But somewhere I will beg to differ with Penny. And I have an additional point to make. Though there are a lot of schools coming up, mushrooming in all parts of the country, not only in India, elsewhere also. If you look at the terminology and the names given to most of them, a lot of them come up with different concepts. There are hybrid concepts which have come up. Day boarding schools, weekly boarding schools. So why attaching that word boarding? Because somewhere down, they do realize that there is something which can be given as an additional through the concept of boarding. We all want to give our children a life, an education which is all encompassing. And when I look at the time given because of a day school or just a day boarding school, being a master of a boarding school, being a parent of children who went to boarding schools. And now when I'm setting up a school, which is a day boarding school, I feel there is so much we can offer, but the time becomes a huge challenge. There is a constraint. There is, we would like to give them sports. We are looking at developing all faculties of the child and all domains we are looking at. So when we look at that, the time from that 8 o'clock to 2 o'clock, or even till 4 o'clock, we fall short of time. And there is so much more that can be done. And for that, we need that extra time and that extra connect. Because unless we have a peep in the lives of the children, which is going beyond the work hours, there is so much which happens at home, especially after COVID. Children who have not been used to seeing their families, who have seen the dark secrets also, especially the boarding school children when they went back home. They were not used to seeing the conflicts at home. Some of them, I'm not saying everybody. So and when we as boarding school masters went past, by the look in their eyes, by their walk, the way they were sitting with their heads drooped, we knew that there was something which was not so well. And Philip is so good at it. We have seen him, just walk past the boys and find out that there is something amiss. So boarding schools, as Monisha clearly started off with that, her opening remark, that it is well woven in the fabric of our Indian culture, right from the times of the Gurukul system, where the the people could afford that kind of education at home itself, where they could bring the best of the teachers to educate their sons, the princes, they still chose to send them out. They chose to send them because that is the kind of discipline. And I still feel there is a requirement of that. And children do pretty well at boarding schools. Obviously, one point which Philip has raised, the admissions, the children opting for boarding schools, somewhere they are getting lesser. They will definitely have their places. The numbers they'll meet the numbers, but the conversion ratio is definitely getting impacted. I mean, the denominator is getting impacted. Like out of so many people, how many students do get selected? So that way, there is a difference. Also, if I look at, if I add another one or two things, when I talk about the exposure, I'm not saying that boarding schools do not give you the exposure, technology and social media, and not that everything goes well at boarding school, but still there is a little controlled exposure. There is adult supervision all the time, which in today's outside world, it is very, very volatile and rampant, and it goes unchecked. We do try to check it at boarding schools, and somewhere we are able to check, not in totality, but it is definitely much better than day schools. The transition, and I, especially being a part of the career counseling team, I have been very, very closely involved with students when they make their transition from the school to college life. A lot of non-academic factors, be it managing themselves. I will not say managing time, because you never manage time. You only manage yourself. Be it their social life, be it the independent set, that the transition which they make when they make from a boarding school to the college it's smoother than what they would otherwise make from a day school, because a lot of it has been dealt with earlier at a younger stage. A lot of things which they come across for the first time, be it homesickness, be it managing their food choices, be it managing their budget, finances to a little extent, because boarding schools where they don't really deal with cash, be it the peer involvement, the conflict resolution, a lot of it they've learned during the boarding school life. So the transition becomes smoother, and which is a very, very important aspect of there. So I think boarding schools are here to stay, and it makes a lot of sense when children are in boarding school. My own daughter went there, and I see.
Ma'am, personally speaking, I too think that a boarding school prepares us for a future endeavors. Like even like I myself, I never studied in a boarding. I was always in a day school. So for the first time I went out for my articleship outside. So that was the first night in the hotel. I was so scared and all the apprehension. So I think all these things goes off when you are having at least 2 to 3 years of your life, like having in a boarding. That is my personal take on it. So thank you so much for the deliberations, ma'am. I will come to Sunayana ma'am next. Ma'am is not from a residential school. I think ma'am is from a non-residential school. So ma'am, good evening, ma'am.
Good evening, how are you?
Yes. So ma'am, my question would be like, you are in a non-residential school for so many years now. So ma'am, what is your take on residential schools, and it's like, how is it going to be there in the future?
Ragori, first of all, I would like to second your thoughts of like a student should get 2 to 3 years staying in some residential school, because I feel I have fond memories of my childhood when I was there in a boarding school, and we learned a lot. Learned the coexistence, learned to stay alone and independent also, and learned disciplined life and whatnot. We had friends to fall back upon even at midnight. There were people around us. So it is, if possible, the student should get a chance to live that life also. And whereas nowadays the situation is like this, there are lots of good quality schools coming up in big cities, and good day boarding schools and day schools, and they are providing every kind of facilities, and they are like big schools also, and the parents are also affluent, and they are migrating to big cities. And this is also a big thing that they are staying with their parents and getting good education as well in the good schools. So that is the main reason, I guess, why the number of admissions in residential schools is stagnating, reducing. Because nowadays parents also feel that if they can stay, or the children, they stay with their parents, they have good connect with their parents and they get values also. And mainly the safety concern. Nowadays, children are exposed to so many things and they are vulnerable also. And seeing the present scenario, the students, the children, little children, they need more of safety. So the parents are concerned about that also. So in my area, I feel that parents have started shifting to the cities. Like in my Jaipur, lots of parents are here in my school, those who have shifted from their villages to Jaipur just for their children's education. So just because they feel that if they are not working, if they are at home, so they should be staying with their children and getting good education also. Whereas in my childhood, I remember my parents were not able to move. So we were sent to, that was the necessity of that time, that we did not have good schools in nearby area. So we were sent to far remote cities to get education. And that was also a good experience. But staying with the parent and getting that safety and that connect and the values and whatnot. Family is always there with the children. So they get good connection with their parents. And in residential schools, what I feel, and overall development is possible. Like the children are there 24/7 in a restricted area, and they are under vigilance, and they are with the connection of their friends also and their teachers also, those who are looking at them, and they are day and night concerned about their development, like what activities can be done in the morning, what can be done in the evening. Day boarding schools, what they do is daytime teaching and evening also teaching. Very less activities and no gap, less gap of rest and recreation and all. And in residential schools, it is possible, like some gap, some recreational activities, and then sports activities and other activities that can take place. And at night also, they have the company of friends also, and learning so many things all together. So residential schools cannot be done away. That is the requirement of this time also. Like when the parents have started working, now we see the nuclear families are there. Both the parents are working and they are getting good salaries also. They are earning good enough. So in that case, if they are not able to take proper care of their children, then the children should be sent to residential schools instead of leaving the child behind in the hands of an ayah. So that is the requirement of a residential school. And now what threat residential schools have is the safety question. They have this very big question on them. Are my children safe over there? Like many of the people whom I talked to, they had bitter memories. Like earlier my Achin sir had said, and my colleague Burret sir had said, there are some safety concerns. Children have some bitter memories also of their past if they are staying at a residential school. So if a residential school is well equipped, all the facilities like camera vigilance is there, good staff is there, proper value culture is there, and they can provide good quality education to the students with personal connect, because this is the main thing what children miss. My children are there in hostel right now, my relatives are there in hostel. So sometimes when they are depressed, then I feel, personal connect is going missing over there. So that is the only time. Otherwise, they get all the facilities. They get tuitions at one place. They are being tutored in the evening, at night, early morning. They are getting up together, praying and doing every chore of their life. So this is the different things where residential schools can mark a big difference in a child's life, provided that the residential schools have good security system and value system, and they have dedicated staff, those uh, those who are, or those who are passionate and feel connection and love for the children. If we can get those kind of people, to residential schools are always required, they will be required, and they'll have a good image also if this thing goes on. But being in this area where I feel people are migrating to big cities, and that is a big threat to residential schools. So, like the day boarding schools are also providing good facilities. So parents are happy. So here Monna, Khanna ma'am may feel, why not residential schools? We are providing everything. We are providing every watch on them, and every connection is being there. So this is a debatable topic. So residential schools are always there. They were there. Number may be less nowadays. People are during this pandemic also, lots of hostels were closed. Lots of schools like that were closed. That was also a main reason that the students and parents migrated to cities and started staying there only. And the source of income was also not that good. So they could not afford the hostel life. That was also a reason why the children were taken out of the hostels. And then there are other coaching things also. The coachings are also mushrooming up. The children need to go for that also. Senior students mainly. So that is also a reason. If the residential schools cannot provide that coaching which is required for the competitive exams, so that is also a reason why the children are taken out from the hostels. So.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for those deliberations. I would love to come to Burret, sir, for some of the questions, sir. Sunayana ma'am has been speaking of safety concerns and concerns of, like I was also thinking like of true love for the students, and you have to get that kind of resources, teachers at school. So how do we like overcome these challenges at a boarding school, especially the safety concerns, sir, from you?
So, initially when COVID struck, there was this tendency that parents wanted children to be near them because, old people in the home were falling ill. Maybe families lost a grandparent. So mothers especially were into, wanting their children to be around them. Later on the COVID, in 2021, I found that boarding schools were probably safer to send your kid to than to keep them at home. Because what would you do with a child in a metro city? How long can you keep a child locked up? Whereas in a boarding school, within the four walls of the school, you actually are still playing games, you're healthy, you're building immunity through, meeting people. Also, being a small, close-knit community, you can monitor who's coming in and have checks. And towards the end of the COVID, I found that a lot of people were saying, open the school. We want our children to be safer at a boarding school than they are at back home, because there's more mixing at home. There's demand to go to the malls and shopping and meet friends, and they were getting ill. Nowadays, of course, most boarding schools have the same facilities in terms of CC cameras and security systems that any school has, safety-wise. If you look at what's written in the papers and all these horrendous stories one reads about, what's happening to children, molestations and, sexual abuse, I haven't come across a boarding school in those news. It's all, smaller day schools who made a mistake, of sorts. I think boarding schools are very safe places. I would rather have my kid in a boarding school today in terms of safety. Also, boarding schools offer two things: formal games, a lot of formal sports, or formal inter-house activities. That's very important. Which day school somehow, things shut down at 2 o'clock or 4 o'clock. And then you got to come back to school if you're in the drama team or the debating team. Everything is done in this much more routine, ritual, rhythm, this rhythm, ritual, and routine that kids love. Also, I think there's a lot of teaching and education that goes on between between students and students, which doesn't happen too much in a day school. Because in a boarding school, life begins after 2 o'clock. And a lot of training and a lot of induction and a lot of passing on of traditions and the right form of behavior is actually transferred from children to children. And this happens in day schools too, but much more in the boarding school. Last point I'd like to make is the influence a teacher has on a student is far greater in a boarding school. In no way do I want to discredit or belittle some of those great teachers in day schools. You may have a fantastic teacher in a day school. His influence is that much less on the child. And, I'll give you a typical, and Monna will bear me out, the typical sentence said by a child in the school I worked in, the residential school. He said, there were only two people in my life who had deep impact on me, my housemaster and my father, in that order. And to which I might, adapt that and say, the people who influenced my son, who was a boarding school product, were his teachers, more than me, much more than me, his teachers, who he revered and looked up to. That is what boarding schools have to offer. So, while I did open by saying that, the market is down and day schools are fast catching up, and the parent attitude is changing, and the parent is focusing much more on, more family life and all that. Boarding schools have a lot to offer too. So that's what my take is on safety.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I would love to come to Monna Khanna ma'am next. Ma'am, it was really, really wonderful listening to your previous deliberations, like boarding schools are a thing of the current, what you mentioned. So ma'am, how do boarding schools, residential schools hold on to their charm? And so like this, just to keep the popularity quotient rising, the popularity curve rising.
So yeah, there are a lot of factors which are attached to boarding schools, and just now Philip has elicited most of them. But yes, to keep on to the charm, the places where they are, somewhere they are losing their charm is that maybe they are not able to match up to the facilities which the new schools are able to offer in certain areas. So that they will have to up. In terms of the teachers, there is no issue because they get pan-India recruitment, whereas a day school, even if they want to hire, I'm not saying there is a dearth of teachers in a particular town or no, but yes, the expertise which they can hire from across the country or from other parts of the world, because they have an accommodation to offer and all of it, they seriously are doing better than the day schools in that case. Yes, they will have to. And Sunayana just talked about the coaching facilities, because some of the parents are a little particular about, their children joining medicine or in doing clearing the Indian competitive examinations, which do need a particular type of coaching. So for that, the schools are already having a tie-up with the best of the institutes, where now the best of the teachers do come and visit the boarding schools in the evening, and they help the students prepare for the competitive exams, whether it is Indian competitive exams or examinations for going to the universities abroad. So that part has been taken care of, and wherever this is lacking, they should consider this, and they should ensure that these facilities are being provided to the children. This and the kind of lifelong friendships which the boarding schools offer, the alumni network, nothing to beat that at all. And it is not just your peer group, it is across the batches that you develop that kind of relationship. And I'll just close it with one line, and me being a mathematics student, a student and a teacher, we are all students, lifelong learners. I'll say, see, the education, I will consider it, the schools, I will consider it as a universal set. And I will consider these two as independent subsets, the boarding schools and the day boarding school. Both of them have their own charm, but they're non-intersecting subsets in a lot of things. They don't have a lot of things in common. And these are few areas which the boarding schools need to improve upon if they have to, which I just mentioned. Otherwise, I think boarding schools are doing pretty well, and they are here to stay.
Okay. Thank you so much, ma'am. That was absolutely heartwarming. And all my thanks to Sunayana ma'am, Monna, Khanna ma'am, and Philip sir. I would love to call Achin for the vote of thanks, please.
Yeah, I think wonderful deliberation, I must say. Very free-flowing, like deliberation, great exchange of views and thoughts. And when I was listening to this, I just remembered like a few weeks back, I was watching this Netflix show, Crown, which I'm sure many of you must have watched. And I remember a very detailed discussion about boarding schools between Her Majesty, the Queen of United Kingdom, Queen Elizabeth, and Prince Charles, with regard to which particular school they want to send their son, Prince of Wales, Prince Charles, are now, of course, the reigning monarch of United Kingdom. And his father insisted so much that he wanted to ensure that he sends the young prince, to Gordonstoun, a privately owned boarding school in the north coast of Scotland. And at a point of time, very recently, I went to one of the interviews that Prince Charles gave just when he was being during his coronation, becoming the king, and he devoted an entire paragraph or two to the contribution of his boarding school in shaping up his personality in so many ways, in making him tough, in ensuring that he can face the world, and how much of a role the school, his teachers, and all his friends had in his upbringing. So I think overall great deliberation. Monisha ma'am, thank you so much for starting the session. And I think ma'am, very aptly you mentioned about the Gurukul system. And also I think that one particular sentence, I think I really liked it. Where you started off that boarding schools are here to stay. And I couldn't agree more with you on that. Burret sir, thank you. I think sir, you're a great batsman, whether you open the innings or you come in as a finisher, as always, flying colors. So I think some great thoughts and very thought-provoking as well. I think what boarding schools have to offer, and especially in spite of the fact that these schools are catching up fast, changing attitude of parents, I think you highlighted the role of teachers, which is so important. And that's where, boarding schools have a great headway. And in fact, Dr. Khanna also mentioned about the same. Dr. Khanna, thank you so much for your deliberation. And I think 2-3 words that you mentioned during this, when you started your deliberation, collaboration, compassion, and empathy, when you mentioned about that particular incident of funds being collected within 24 hours, really wonderful, wonderful. And also, I think you mentioned something else, which is also very important and very practical, time constraint, the fact that there's so much to do. And the reason why boarding schools have so much to offer. So with that extra connect, extra time, extra effort, they can really make a huge difference. So I think we all agree with you on that. And thank you so much for your deliberation. Sunayana ma'am, thank you. I think you highlighted some of the practical aspects, like, of course, security concern of parents, which is a real concern, huge concern, in fact, I'll say. And also the fact that today with so many nuclear families, so much of migration happening to cities, parents moving for their jobs, of course, the earlier scenario of schools or great quality of institutions not being available in the vicinity is lesser of a challenge for many of urban parents who are migrating to bigger cities. So that is one of the reasons, of course, as you rightly mentioned. So I think overall, great session. I thank all of you for your time, for being with us here today evening. I also thank members of the esteemed audience for being with us here today. I look forward to your continued support in the sessions to come. Thank you. Take care and goodbye.
Thank you very much and good night to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.